Hey guys, it's Flippin Hippo. Thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel at Flippin Hippos. Today is Friday, November 23rd. It's Black Friday for those of you that went out and braved the crowds to go shopping or sourcing today. I hope you found everything you wanted and you were safe and not too stressed out. I also hope that everyone had a good Thanksgiving yesterday, whether you spent it with friends, family, alone, or don't even celebrate. I just hope everyone had a really good day yesterday. So today I want to tell you about something that happened to us very recently. I'm not sure where I'm going with the video. I want to say it's a cautionary tale, but by the end of this you're going to see that there's really no way around certain new policies. So me telling you that it happened to me can't really be a cautionary tale because there's no way for you to avoid it. There's just no way to avoid it. So it's not really a cautionary tale or a warning. I don't really want to be going into a rant today. Maybe I want to vent a little bit, but I don't really want to rant. I just kind of want to tell you what happened, get the facts out there, and just kind of let you guys know what's going on and what we have been told about certain policies. So I guess maybe this is just for a record. Maybe I'm just putting out there what happened to us for a record. I want to give you some backstory, so I'm going to have to go backwards in time and tell you about a couple other instances or situations that happened to us, just so that you get the entire background, you get the entire picture. I want to paint the entire picture for you guys so you can get a grasp of everything we have been told and the differing stories we've been told as the year progressed, or depending on what day it is or what representative we spoke to. I do want to say that is my number one frustration with the eBay customer service reps. A lot of times when you call in, you get a different answer than you got last time. Or you can call in the morning and then call in the evening and get a different answer. I know that universally throughout the Facebook groups, I see that as advice time and time again. Just keep calling back until you get a rep who tells you what you want to hear. Just keep calling back. You'll eventually get a rep that will tell you differently than the one you just spoke to. I don't know how hard it is to universally train your employees to all be on the same page, all be educated on the policies of the company, but apparently it is. Apparently there is no universal training across the board for eBay service reps, customer service reps, and not all of them are trained in the policies, or they're trained in different policies, or they're not told when policies update. And you can get different answers from different reps because they're all on different pages. They all think the policy is different, or I don't know. I will say that we have the concierge service, so the reps we speak to are United States based. They work at the headquarters in California. You would think that these reps would actually be all universally trained within that building and all know the policies, but that's not always the case either. You can message Facebook for Business on eBay and get a different answer than we got from concierge. So that's my number one frustration with the customer service reps for the sellers on eBay. They're not all on the same page. They're not universally trained. Everybody's got a different response. Everybody's got a different answer. Everybody thinks the policy is different, and that is so frustrating. So let's just get into the backstory. So on 3 different occasions at the beginning of this year, and I believe one may have even happened in December of last year, on 3 different occasions we had item not as described cases opened on us. 2 were for color and 1 was for size. We called in, and this was prior to concierge. We got that in July when we went to eBay Open. So this was prior to concierge, but we called the number for eBay customer service on all 3 occasions. They looked at the case, they talked it over with us, and we were told that color is not a reason for return or an item not as described. It can never be considered an item not as described. The color is a buyer's remorse reason, and obviously the one that was open for doesn't fit under item not as described was not an item not as described. And in all 3 of those occasions, the rep that we spoke to on the phone closed the return and reopened it under buyer's remorse. So they closed the item not as described and reopened a new return under buyer's remorse. They contacted the buyer all 3 times to let them know that this is what was done, and because their return was buyer's remorse, they would be responsible for shipping. And then if you fast forward a little bit, we had a return for size. I have these notes. So if you guys see me pause, I've got an outline here of notes just to make sure I get all my facts 100% straight and tell you the story exactly as it happened in the order it happened. So you fast forward a couple of months, and we had another item not as described open for doesn't fit. He was saying that size and that brand typically runs, I think he said larger. I can't remember, but it's basically he was saying the size in this brand was fitting him differently than all the other same brand sizes that he had, and he wanted to return it for doesn't fit. But because the tag said the size and we had everything lined up right, we figured it was an open and shut case, just like those other three, right? So we called in and we said, we have this item not as described for size, and we need you to close this out for us and then reopen it as buyer's remorse. We're more than welcome to take his return, but we don't want the item not as described. And it was never really a matter of paying for the label for us either. Let me just put that out there. We do have actually now free returns on most of our items. When we fight the items as not as described, it's more about just not having an item not as described on our account. If it's opened improperly, I don't want that, okay? So we were told on the phone that they couldn't do that, and they never could. But you just did this 3 times for us. No, we didn't. We've never been able to close returns. You're just going to have to take this return, and you can fight the return label and maybe get a refund. I didn't like that answer. So instead of calling back in, we contacted eBay for Business and spoke with them. The reason we did that was because a lot of times, and you guys know this that don't have concierge, a lot of times if you contact eBay for Business, you can kind of get a better answer or a more realistic answer than you get on the phone. It seems like the reps that answer the messages at eBay for Business know the policies a bit better. So we contacted them, and they agreed with the person on the phone. They basically told Keith in messages that they couldn't close out the return. They could clearly see that it was an item not as described, open improperly for size, but they could not close it out. And Keith sent them some screenshots and informed them, hey, you have before. This happened 3 times. And he was told that he must have misunderstood or been mistaken, because that was not the case. They said that they have never been able to close cases, ever. If it was an item not as described, even if it was opened improperly, you had to take the return. They could not close it. They could not change the reason, and they've never been able to do that. So the fact that it had happened 3 times before didn't really happen, I guess. I don't know. It was like they were trying to gaslight us, because they were saying, you must have been mistaken or you misunderstood what happened. So then Keith asked them about the defects, because after the free return system was implemented, most of you are aware that now they have a defect system, and when you get a certain percentage of item not as described compared to your peers in the same category, and you have those many defects or you have a higher return rate, you start to pay higher percentages on your final value fees, and there's other dings and things that you're going to get. So he asked them, what happens if you reach the amount of defects you have, or the percentage you need to have higher than your peers on items not as described, that you're going to be paying the higher percentages on your final value fees, but every single one of those items not as described was for fit reason. He said, hypothetically, if you had enough item not as described defects on your account for you to pay the higher percentage, but you could see they were all not properly filed, none of them were actually item not as described, would you still pay the higher rate? And they answered him with, hypothetically, in that situation, yes. So now when buyers are opening item not as described for doesn't fit, or for color, or for any other reason that's clearly buyer's remorse, they're not going to change it. They're not going to take the defect off. They basically, once an item not as described is open, you must take the return and you must take the defect. And if you get enough, you're going to pay the higher rates, even if they can clearly see that all of your dings or defects were false. This was right before we went to Vegas, this situation. So fast forward, we hadn't had any issues for a very long time. Most of our returns are coming back for doesn't fit under the free returns, and the ones like the jeans that we don't have free returns on, they open properly as doesn't fit, and they send it back. But then I had a pair of jeans a couple weeks ago. They opened item not as described because the jeans had a hole in them. I called in and I said, if you look at the listing, it says in the description that these jeans are ripped, torn, distressed, whatever, they have a hole, and the hole is clearly pictured. And the description actually says, see photos for hole. And the rep on the phone said, yes, I can see where you clearly described this and showed the photographs of it. They should not have opened this as item not as described, but they did. So you're just going to have to accept it and take the return back. And when it gets returned to you, you can call back in and we can get you the amount for the label refunded. So I think this was like maybe 3 weeks ago. At this point, the rep on the phone was saying, yes, they could see where I had clearly described the damage. I had photographed it. I had done everything I was supposed to do. But because the buyer didn't want to pay the return shipping and opened item not as described, or maybe they didn't pay attention to the original listing and thought the hole was not in the jeans, I don't know. They forced us to take the return. They gave us our return shipping back, but now we have another defect. Then we had a phone. They opened as item not as described because it didn't work. Well, it said in the description that the phone didn't work. It was sold as is for parts or repair, and we had no returns on the listing. However, the way it was explained to us on the phone, because the phone was in the used category, we had to take it back. If you put something up for if you put something up for as is for parts or repair, but you have it in the category as used, the buyer has an expectation that it's going to work. So even if you say it's broken, it doesn't work, you cannot have it in the used category because they can then open item not as described for not working, bypass your personal policy of no returns, bypass the as is for parts or repair, and you're forced to take the return. So I talked to that rep for a while, and basically what I got from his is if you want to sell broken electronics as is for parts or repair and put no returns on your listing, under category you can choose as is for parts or repair, and that will protect you as a seller. This is clearly what was explained to me by this rep. You can choose the category for parts or repair. You have to put in your description that it is as is for parts or repair. You have to clearly describe and photograph any and all damage, and then you turn the returns off on your listing, and that is the only way we can have seller protection for those items. He said if we did all of that they would back us up on any returns, close them out, and not force us to take them. But on this particular one, we had to take it because we had put it in the category as used. We weren't happy with that, but we kind of thought, well, this is a lesson. Moving forward, we'll just make sure that they're in the parts or repair category, and we'll have that seller protection, and we'll have eBay backing us up if they try to return it for being broken, even though it was sold as is broken. So moving forward, any broken phones or other broken electronics that we put up, we made sure they were in the proper category for parts or repair. Now, just a couple of days ago, we had another return opened on a phone. The description for the phone clearly showed all the damage, what worked, what didn't work. It was in the category parts or repair. There is no returns on our listing as our policy. It was sold as is. The description and everything was great. Before the buyer bought it, he sent us a message and asked us if it was iCloud locked. Keith wrote back and said, we were told by the person we bought this from that it is not iCloud locked, but we cannot guarantee that because the home button doesn't work and we can't get past the opening screen. So we cannot guarantee that this is not iCloud locked. The buyer proceeded to buy it anyway. I guess he was going to take a chance with it. And then he opened a return a couple days after getting it, stating that it was iCloud locked, and we told him it wasn't, and he wanted to return it. So I called eBay Tuesday morning, fully confident that this was going to be an open and shut case, because just a couple weeks ago, I talked to the rep that told me if I put it in the proper category and did everything I'm supposed to do, and they try to open a return on it, that eBay would have my back, I would have seller protection, and I would not be forced to take the return. So when I called in, I got a rep on the phone who agreed with me, who said, yeah, I can see where you described this exactly as it is. You answered his question before he bought it, and his reason for opening it is not correct, because we told him we couldn't guarantee it, and he's saying in the return that we did. But this rep said, I have to transfer you to one of our return specialists to see what they can do for you. Well, the return specialist gets on the phone, and he agrees with me too. He says, yeah, you guys did everything you were supposed to do. This was described properly. You answered all of his questions before he bought it. It was sold as described. Unfortunately, because he opened an item not as described return, you have to take the return. And I was flabbergasted, you guys. And this particular rep tried to tell me that he's also a seller before he ever even worked for eBay as a rep. He was a seller on eBay, and he can 100% appreciate my frustration. I don't really think he appreciated my frustration, but that's okay. That's what they're trained to say. But I just basically said to him, I said, I was told if we put it in the category parts or repair, that was our seller protection, and that was the only way to get you guys to back us up on a return. And he said, unfortunately, no. I wish you could tell me exactly the date and time that you were told that, so I could go back through the recorded phone calls, find out what rep told you that, and make sure he's reprimanded, because he never should have told you that. That's absolutely not true. And I said, so clarify for me. If I do everything I'm supposed to do, if it's in the category parts or repair, we put all damage described in the description, we take photographs of all of it, we have returns turned off, it's sold as is, and we answer any questions before they buy it, and they get it, and they open item not as described, we have to take it back. And he said, unfortunately, yes, anytime a buyer opens up an item not as described case, you are forced to take the return. Now, in a case such as yours, we can offer to refund you the shipping for the return label, because you did do everything you were supposed to do. And I said, well, no, you should be closing the case. Refunding my money isn't really backing me up or giving me any kind of seller protection. I said, why do you guys have a for parts or repair category? Why are we allowed to sell items as is if you're going to force us to take returns anyway? And he said, well, that's a very good question. The way our system is set up, it's set up for honest buyers. And unfortunately, the dishonest buyers can get around it. And I said, but you still didn't answer my question. What's the point of having a for parts or repair category, listing something as is broken, doing everything you're supposed to do, having everything 100% correctly described, and turning the returns off on your item if you guys are going to force people to take returns when they're opened item not as described? And again, he said, that's a very good question, and I understand your frustration, but unfortunately, the way our system is set up, if they open an item not as described, you have to take it back. This is the only way for us to set up an honest and fair system for our honest buyers. It's not perfect, but this is the only way we can set this up, and unfortunately our dishonest buyers are going to take advantage of it. And I may have gotten a little sneaky, and I said, I don't really think that's the only way you can set up a return system. Have you ever heard of Poshmark? And he kind of laughed, but I told him, Poshmark doesn't do this to their sellers. All sales are final. Unless it's a clear item not as described. Like if they order 7 For All Mankind jeans and you send them American Eagle, of course Posh will make you take the item back, but it has to be a clear item not as described case, which this wasn't. I didn't get the answer I wanted from him, so I just eventually ended the phone call. I called back Wednesday evening. I got a rep on the phone. I explained the whole situation to this rep again, and I told her I was calling back in because the answer I got the day before didn't sit right with me. It didn't feel right. I kind of felt like maybe that rep didn't understand the policies or just was new. It just didn't feel right to me, and she said she certainly understood. She said she could see that the item we sold was exactly as described and we had done everything that we were supposed to do. Could I please hold while she got a return specialist on the line? So this return specialist comes on the line. This is not the fourth person I've technically spoken to. And He says he can see my messages. He's read it. And yes, we told the guy we couldn't guarantee it. It looks like he just bought it hoping that it would work, and it didn't. We had done everything we were supposed to do. The item we sold was exactly as described, but unfortunately, because he opened it, item not as described, we had to take the return back. And I said to him, we were told if you put it in the as is, or the parts or repair category, that you guys would back us up and have seller protection. And he said, no, as is not really a thing. With the new system that we have in place for free returns, the item not as described must always be accepted. And he kind of went in talking about free returns and the new return system and how eBay's kind of going to where they want everybody to do free returns. And ever since this was implemented back in April, the system now is set up so that any item not as described open, the seller has to take back. But if it is a clear case of an improperly opened item not as described, we can get our label refunded. And I said, I don't really think that's seller protection, and I don't really think that's fair. You refunding our label just negates the whole purpose of anybody selling anything as is for parts or repair. You understand that your dishonest buyers, once word gets out and people figure this out, they're going to buy our stuff, gut it, and send it back, and we're going to have to take it back, and you're going to give us our label back, but now we're left with a product that we can't sell because it doesn't have anything inside of it for parts or repair. But yeah, he just kept repeating himself over and over again that this new system, and I wasn't getting the answer I wanted, and I didn't want to fight, so I told him that. I said, I don't want to be on the phone with you anymore. You're upsetting me, and I know it's not your fault, so I hung up on him. And then we called back about an hour and a half later, and this was the third phone call. I got the regular rep on the phone, described the entire situation. I mean, it was the same thing all over again on the third phone call. You got the regular rep who said they could see that this was, as described, but they had to get the return specialist on the phone. So now we have the third return specialist on the phone since this all began, who also said that they could see our messages to the guy, the description, the photos, and everything was 100% done right. But we still had to take the return because it was opened item not as described. And he said the same thing as the other guy. Ever since April, with this new system in place, with these new returns, anytime an item not as described is open for any reason, the seller has to take it. But if it's clear that it wasn't an item not as described, they'll refund our label. So we basically have to take any item not as described returns back, but we can appeal it when it comes back or fight it and get the return label refunded. And if it comes back differently than we shipped it out, he said we could go through an appeal process to get our money back. But we asked him, well, how do we have a leg to stand on if he sends it back exactly the way it was, which we anticipate? We don't anticipate this buyer being dishonest and sending it back missing parts or gutting it. We really don't see him doing that. It's going to come back exactly the way we sent it to him. We think he took a chance on the iCloud working and it didn't, and he wants to return it, period. This isn't going to be a case of where it comes back differently, so why would we appeal it? We wouldn't even have a leg to stand on. And he agreed with us and said basically you really wouldn't have a leg to stand on if it came back the way it was. You really couldn't appeal it. You can only appeal it if it's different. But then it's going to come down to your word against his, and can you prove it? So the appeal system isn't perfect either. We got to speak to an appeal specialist as well. They patched us through to an appeal specialist to explain that entire process to us. But that doesn't really sound like it's set up very fairly either. It would be our word against the buyers. Any photos or video we provided isn't really going to, do anything for us. It basically would probably come down to filing one of those federal IC3. Sorry, I had to ask Keith. The IC3. Is it a case? Or just like something you file? The IC3 thing you file through the federal government for mail fraud. So the appeal system isn't even set up perfectly. But the thing is I don't anticipate having to appeal it. If a buyer opens an item not as described for doesn't fit, you're not going to get a different item back. That's not necessarily a dishonest buyer sending you something different. They're just trying to get around the system and return it to you without having to pay the return shipping. Or in our case, they're trying to get around the we don't have returns on. This item was clearly as is, no returns. They're trying to get around that and still send it back to us because they took a risk on something working and it didn't. I think I told you the guy that the return specialist explained to us that this is the new system since April. Before he transferred us to the appeals girl, he explained to us that in the past, the customer reps, all had the ability to close cases, and that the sellers were abusing the system. That so many cases were getting closed and reps were closing cases that shouldn't be closed, and that is why ever since April they took away the ability to close cases. So what he's saying is a lot of sellers were calling in on items not as described, and the reps were closing them out, and it was happening so often that they feel like the sellers were abusing the system. And I said, well, I don't really see that as sellers abusing the system. If all of the customer reps were properly trained on what is and what is not an actual item not as described case, and what is and what is not an item not as described open properly or improperly, then you wouldn't have too many cases being closed that shouldn't be. It's not the seller's fault. It's not the sellers abusing the system. If we call in and all of the reps are all universally 100% properly trained on the policies of eBay, and they all know what a real item not as described case is and what a falsely filed item not as described case is, you wouldn't have too many cases getting closed. But he's trying to say it was the seller's fault. They were all calling in and getting stuff closed left and right, and they were abusing the system. And I don't really see it that way, honestly. I see that as your reps aren't trained right. Your reps are closing them. It takes 2 seconds to train someone on, hey, color and size is not item not as described, wrong brand is, and then have them close or not close accordingly. But all that aside, apparently they feel like the sellers were abusing the system and all of the cases were getting closed when they shouldn't have been. So back in April, they took away the ability. He said it like legitimately, like in the programming, in the software that they use with all of their permissions and looking at your account and the notes they can do, it was taken out of there. Like there's no longer a button or anywhere for them to do it that they used to have. He said it like legitimately was programmed out of their software that none of them have this ability to close out cases anymore. So across the board, item not as described has to be accepted 100% of the time, no matter the reason, by all sellers, because no one can close it out. And the only thing they can do for you moving forward is to refund your shipping label if it was opened improperly, and they can report the buyer. And if buyers get reported too often, they'll get a ding. And if they get too many dings, they could close their account down. So basically, and we said this to the guy, so you basically flipped the script the other way. You're saying that so many sellers were getting cases closed that you just shut that ability down by your reps, but now you're on the other end of the spectrum where your buyers are abusing the system. Now you've got buyers opening item not as described left and right that can't get closed, that seller has to accept it no matter what. And he said, unfortunately, yes. Do you hear this? Unfortunately, yes, the script has been flipped and it's not fair. Now it's more biased for the buyers. So when they thought the scales were too far in their seller's corner, when they thought they were backing their seller too much and things were unfair for their buyer, instead of trying something out in the middle, they just completely flipped the script, and now it's all 100% biased for the buyers and the sellers can't do anything. I had 3 reps basically tell me this. There is no more seller protection as far as returns. Buyers can open item not as described for any reason they want, and you have to take it back regardless. It doesn't matter what your policy is, if you have returns on or not. You could have free returns on and they could open an item not as described for size, which is clearly incorrect, because if you have free returns on, they should just be saying it doesn't fit and sending it back to you, and you move on because you have the free returns. It doesn't matter, you're still going to get the item not as described. Anytime an item not as described is open on you, you must accept it. There's 0% seller protection anymore for that. The only thing you can do is call in an appeal if the item is sent back differently, and you can get your label back if you really want to fight it and say it shouldn't have been item not as described and it wasn't a free return. You can call in and fight to get your label, the return label money refunded. But you obviously have no seller protection anymore on returns, 0%. These reps have no ability to close these cases, so they say. I don't know if I believe that or not. I mean, he was very specific about the software and stuff when he explained it to me, but I had people from eBay for Business messaging me that I was confused and I was misunderstanding them, and I didn't understand what was going on because they've never had the ability to close these cases. Do you see where I'm going with this? They used to close cases for us, and now they don't. So the rep, the last and final third return specialist we spoke to Wednesday night, that made sense, what he said. That they used to be able to close them, but too many were getting close, so they took the ability away. Because I know they used to do it for us, and now they can't. But in between this guy admitting that to me and them used to doing it, used to having the ability to do it, we had eBay for Business telling us that never have they ever had that ability. No rep could ever close out a return. We're mistaken. So somebody's not telling the truth. All of the stories are different. I guess that's besides the point. This video is supposed to explain to you guys how you have absolutely zero seller protection anymore on returns, and I've basically had reps admit that to me. The 3 return specialists I spoke to were asked by me, so you're telling me that as a seller I have 0% protection against item not as described returns being opened against me improperly or falsely? And they said yes. This is set up for their honest buyers, but unfortunately every dishonest buyer is going to start abusing the system, and it's not going to take long for them to be completely the opposite of where they used to be. All they've done is flip the script. They need to find a fair way to be in the middle. They need to train their reps. I mean, if you trained your reps properly, I don't even think any of this would be a problem. If they were trained right and you called in and said, I have an item not as described, they would be able to clearly look at it and go, well, yeah, that is item not as described. I'm sorry, you're going to have to take it back. Or, wow, no, the size doesn't fit, isn't item not as described. Or, as is for parts, you described this 100% perfectly and did everything you were supposed to do. We'll close this out for you and reopen it as buyer's remorse. It's not that hard. Just train your reps right. You wouldn't have too many cases being closed if your reps were trained right. But I feel like this is 100% set up for buyers. We have no protection anymore. Even if you don't want to take returns, if you're one of the people that doesn't have free returns on and wants to take no returns back, guess what happens if an item not as described is opened up? You're taking it back regardless, even if it says because it didn't fit. So there's no reason for any of us to even have paid returns turned on or no returns, because if they open up an item not as described, you got to take it back. And my biggest issue with that is the defects. So ever since they set up the free returns, the whole defect thing, if you get so many item not as described, a higher percentage than your peers, you're going to start paying a higher percentage. But because all the item not as described have to stay that way, nobody can close them, nobody can change them anymore, and they have to stay that way, then we're all going to get dinged more. And that was what one of the reps told me, that's how they're keeping it fair. Because of the way this is all set up now, and we all just have to accept item not as described no matter what, that we're all getting a higher percentage and we're all getting more defects, so that your peers stay with you as you go up and you won't like explode faster than anyone else, because we're all going to have way more item not as described on our accounts. I don't know. I just think that this entire system needs revamped. I think their reps all need to be retrained universally across the board. The eBay for Business, the concierge, the reps overseas, they all need to be retrained, and they all need to be retrained in the same manner, on the same page, with the same policies. It shouldn't be that you can just keep calling back in until you get the answer you want. It should be you get the proper answer the first time and everybody's trained correctly. I don't feel like it's fair that buyers can circumvent the system and open an item not as described. I don't think that's fair. People have free returns on or they don't, and that you should not be able to get around that for an item not fitting. People sell electronics that are broken as is. If everything is described correctly, the pictures are good, the buyer asks questions before they buy it, and you answer them honestly, they shouldn't be able to return it. The whole point of having a for parts or repair as is category is supposed to be so people buy broken crap from you and can't return it. I think I'm done. I'm just going to start ranting if I go on anymore. If you guys have experienced any of these item not as described unfair cases, let me know in the comments below what your experience was, what you were told on the phone. I want to see how many of us are getting different stories. This last one, it was 3 different reps telling me the same exact thing, and they were all concierge reps, so I'm starting to believe this version. But I'm still hearing from other people that, oh, hey, just last week I called in and got an item not as described closed. And now they're telling me they haven't been able to do that since April. Or they're telling me they were never able to do it. So I'm just kind of curious as to, are we all getting the same story? Are we all getting different stories? Are they still closing out item not as described in certain situations? Is it just cell phones and electronics that they're being so stingent about? Or just as is for parts or repair? I don't know. But let me know in the comments below if you've experienced any of these item not as described that were opened improperly. What were you told? What was the outcome? Did you get your return label back? Etc., etc. Just tell me your stories down below. Let me know what you think. I tried to be as factual in this as I could without any emotions or ranting because I'm not happy, but I don't want to be negative and ranty or anti-eBay. I'm still going to sell on eBay. I still love eBay. It is the best platform for any of us to sell on. They are global. They are universal. They have the biggest audience. We make most of our money off of eBay versus all of our other platforms. More eyeballs are on eBay. More people know about eBay. We do really well on eBay. I'm not anti-eBay. I'm not saying we should all run for the hills. I will still sell on there. I'm just not happy with them right now, and that's okay. I don't have to be happy with them 100% of the time. I don't have to agree with everything they do. I'm not happy with them right now, but I will continue to sell on the platform and just hope that moving forward, they implement policies that are more fair for the seller and the buyer. Like, hopefully they can find something in the middle that's fair to both. It should not be totally one way or the other. I'm not saying they need to flip the script again and make it unfair to buyers. They need to find a way to balance it out, to balance those scales so that everybody is getting a fair treatment. Do me a favor and hit the like button before you leave if you would. If you haven't already and you would like to, please subscribe to our channel and help us feed a hungry hippo. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're at Flippin' Hippos. Until next time, you guys have a good night.